Thank you very much, Ken Yong. Ambassador Hong Ken Yong, the Honorable Chair, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen. First, allow me to extend my thanks to the India Foundation for inviting me as one of the speakers of this conference. We are on the session regarding progress, and progress, as stated in the concept note which I received together with the invitation, can be secured through peace in the Indian Ocean region, which will ultimately lead to prosperity and prosperity for the region. Now, under the theme of progress, the concept note also suggested some key points for discussion. These include the strengthening of bilateral and multilateral networks and institutions, the strengthening of domestic political institutions, statecraft, efforts for educational and cultural developments, and, this is very interesting, the possibility of creating a common parliament along the lines of the European Parliament for the Indian Ocean region. I would like to address these from the perspectives and experiences of ASEAN and Southeast Asia, particularly in the evolution of ASEAN and where Southeast Asia is heading as a region. It can, I believe, provide interesting insights and contrasts as well as lessons for the Indian Ocean, and perhaps stimulate debate and discussion on some of the ways forward as the Indian Ocean region seeks a more integrated, cooperative, and progressive future. Now, I believe that in order to achieve progress in an endeavor such as that envisaged under the Indian Ocean Cooperation, we need to pay closer attention and direct greater focus to the following areas. I'm just, in a way, repeating what others have been saying. I think number one is inclusivity and greater connectivity. Any venture has to be founded on the principle of inclusivity, and it should start off with the promotion of connectivity. A lot has been said about connectivity, but I believe this would involve physical connectivity, political and diplomatic connectivity, economic connectivity, social and cultural connectivity, people-to-people connectivity, and what is also very, very important, the connectivity of ideas. Second, innovation, adaptation, and transformation. In order for countries to progress on their own or in cooperation with others, the spirit of innovation, adaptation, and transformation must be inculcated and observed at all levels. Third, technology and change. Countries and societies need to be aware of the dizzying pace of change and must be ready for the onslaught of technological advancements in the wake of the fourth industrial revolution. And the fourth is cooperation and collaboration, and this should be developed with a view to promoting open and inclusive regional integration. Let me go to the point about strengthening bilateral and multilateral institutional frameworks or networks. In the case of ASEAN, a promising start in strengthening bilateral and multilateral institutional networks is not only at the level of governments, but there is also a network among track 2 players. There is, for example, a track 2 dialogue among think tanks involving India and ASEAN, with the launch of the ASEAN-India network of think tanks in 2012. And perhaps this can serve as a model for expanding engagement throughout the Indian Ocean region. Besides think tanks, there could be more regular and better exchanges among academic institutions in the IOR countries. And for a sharper focus and more tangible results, these regular exchanges could focus on discussions and research on issues that are directly relevant to the Indian Ocean. Bilateral and multilateral networks for the Indian Ocean, law enforcement agencies could also be established. This will be of clear and direct advantage through better international enforcement and more coordinated and effective measures and actions against threats such as transnational crime and terrorism. And as the idea of Indian Ocean cooperation progresses, it needs to become relevant to and be engaged with the wider populations in relevant countries. And here I believe close cooperation among media institutions and networks can play an important role. We can consider regular exchanges and mutual secondment programs among middle management media personnel, for example, such as editors, and both in the mainstream and alternative media. And again, it would help if focus is observed in specific areas such as international relations, business, technology, and travel and lifestyle features. Further, to connect peoples better, the groundwork must be laid to encourage useful discourses among Indian Ocean civil society groups. Apart from a few transnational organizations, most of these groups are local and operate independently from similar groups abroad. Much can mutually be learned with regular and meaningful dialogue among them. And I think we must not forget the role of the private sector. The role of the private sector is of course very crucial as engines for growth, as leaders for innovation, as well as advisors to government. And governments need to work closely with the private sectors in their own countries as well as across the region to create a friendly and conducive business environment and facilitate trade and investment. And of course, the development of SMEs, or now they're known as MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises. The role of these SMEs is very crucial since SMEs constitute the majority of businesses and enterprises in the Indian Ocean countries. In ASEAN, for example, SMEs constitute 97% of the businesses. The next point is strengthening domestic political institutions and statecraft. Addressing domestic political institutions and statecraft can be a bit tricky, as it normally involves dealing with various domestic and national sensitivities. Hence, any strengthening of domestic political institutions and statecraft, I believe, is best done by the national institutions and mechanisms of each country. But there are some opportunities, I believe. More regular dialogue among IOR political and state institutions would be a promising start. A natural advantage may be found among the British Commonwealth member countries, given their common governance heritage. The respective judiciaries and legal professions in the Indian Ocean countries can also gain. In Malaysia and Singapore, for example, the legal fraternity has historically relied on valuable inputs and continues to refer to legal precedents from Indian, South African, and Australian judicial systems, all of whom are IOR countries. And this has been possible not only through the common heritage of these respective legal systems, but also the close contact maintained throughout the years. Now, much of the same may be said for ministries and civil services. They can benefit from greater dialogue and exchange of best practices and lessons learned. Just to give an example, in Malaysia, tremendous progress has been made in the civil service in terms of improving public service delivery through such efforts as the Government Transformation Program, or GTP, and also through innovative measures and programs such as the National Blue Ocean Strategy and the Urban Transformation Centers. These urban transformation centers are essentially they bring together different departments and agencies to be represented, and they have worked extremely well in providing one-stop services. And one example is the application and renewal of passports and driving licenses. And this can be done in as quickly as 30 minutes. Of course, there's a heavy reliance on IT in this regard. Now in ASEAN, for example, even before the advent of the ASEAN community and its 3 pillars, there has been growing contact and cooperation among various ministries, agencies and departments of the member states at the ministerial as well as the senior officials level. There is now, of course, recognition that the civil services in ASEAN could work much more closely to support and push forward regional integration efforts. Next, I move on to educational and cultural developments. Countries in the Indian Ocean region are actually no strangers to education and cultural cooperation. Cooperation in these areas has long been a key element of various bilateral relationships and multilateral programs, such as under the Colombo Plan and through the Commonwealth. These include educational cooperation and cultural exchange programs, promotion of art, film and literature, greater facilitation of tourism, commitments to jointly focus on investments and trade, and human resources development. Other segments that should be explored and would promise great potential are those in the areas of youth and sports. Youth programs could go hand in hand with technology and entrepreneurial development programs in the face of disruptive technology and the 4th industrial revolution. In Southeast Asia, the remit of both education and culture in terms of regional progress comes under the pillar of the ASEAN's socio-cultural community. And this marks an interesting development for ASEAN, which has traditionally been focused on economic, diplomatic, and strategic security cooperation. The socio-cultural pillar covers a vast array of sectors, which also includes environment, disaster response, health, social welfare, poverty eradication, youth, and women, to name a few. So some of these, I think, can be replicated in respect of cooperation in the context of the Indian Ocean. And there is certainly a greater scope for cooperation in education in the IOR. India, Australia, and Malaysia are among the major education hubs in the Indian Ocean region. There are renowned centers of excellence in other countries as well, such as in Singapore. The existing mechanisms binding Indian Ocean countries, such as in ASEAN, the Commonwealth, GCC, SAARC, and others, could form the basis for initiatives within the context of the IOR. Rather than aiming for an ambitious single Indian Ocean region structure or architecture, efforts could start off with linking all existing regional initiatives in a web of cooperation benefiting peoples in the respective countries. Next point is, as I said, what has been suggested in the concept note, the creation of a common parliament. Of course, the natural question that accompanies any emerging cooperative endeavor between multiple countries is what kind or level of institutionalization is desired. It has been suggested that one of the issues to be addressed is the creation of a common parliament. Implicit in that statement is that perhaps Europe or the experience of the Europeans can be a model here. And implicit here is that Europe could serve as a model for the future Indian Ocean region. Now we know that the EU is by far the most institutionalized and supranational regional organization. But what has emerged over the years is actually a bewildering, complex set of institutions, bodies, and agencies. And Brexit certainly has given rise to major questions related to the European style of integration. The EU model is not necessarily what other regions could or should wish to emulate. In ASEAN, for example, we have no pretensions to being a replica of the EU in Southeast Asia. ASEAN has a secretariat and a few other central bodies, such as the ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Assistance on Disaster Management and the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. But these are primarily coordinating bodies that serve in coordinating roles rather than being supranational in nature. And much of the powers in ASEAN continues to be vested in the individual member states. So the level of institutionalization is particularly contingent upon the historical experiences of different regions. Europe is unique in one sense. Southeast Asian countries, on the other hand, view ASEAN as a pathway towards enhancing their strategic autonomy. ASEAN generates an expanded range of options for its member states to manage relations between themselves as well as with extra-regional countries. Now, we should ponder to what extent cooperation in the Indian Ocean should be institutionalized in order to ensure progress. Current efforts may take time to lead to a situation that would go beyond having a secretariat, which is already there in Mauritius. Now, given the sheer diversity of the countries of the Indian Ocean and the vast distances that separate some of them, it remains premature to assert that there is a sufficient cohesion between them to justify having institutions that have anything beyond a coordinating remit. It is still early days, and the groundwork for greater cooperation, let alone institutionalization, needs to be well laid. Conclusions. At the heart of efforts to forge cooperation in the Indian Ocean region are a couple of questions. Where is the imperative? What are the catalysts? The answer, to me, ultimately lies in whether the countries around the Indian Ocean region consider themselves as constituting a region. Do they see themselves as sharing commonalities that go beyond being physically close to the Indian Ocean? Could an Indian Ocean identity be developed? Generating a regional consciousness among countries that happen to be in close proximity to a common body of water comprising nations in Asia, Africa, and Oceania is going to be a tremendous challenge. And that is because, for the most part, we still feel that regions are defined in relation to land masses, the Pacific Islands being a notable and understandable exception. Even Southeast Asia is conceived in relation to a continent, in this case, Asia. The notion of the Asia-Pacific emerged as a concept primarily because of the hitherto dominance and presence of the United States in East Asia. Indo-Pacific is a rather more forced concept and has more to do with anxieties about the evolving strategic landscape rather than and new equations in major power relations rather than constituting what anybody would naturally regard as a region in itself. Geography matters, and in the general conception of regions, I believe land still dominates the sea. So those who wish to see countries around the Indian Ocean operate as a region will therefore have to lay the foundational basis of regional consciousness. And that has to start at the educational, cultural, and people-to-people level. We must get journalists to work together. We must get ministers, officials, and think tanks, scholars to meet, as we are doing yesterday and today. And we must get youth and school children to interact. It is this web of relationships that will help us make progress in our cooperative endeavors in the Indian Ocean based on peace and aimed at achieving greater prosperity. Thank you.